Hi, I'm Alicia. This is Unencumbered. Today we'll be talking about Disney Pixar's Soul. Today are 5 lessons that Christians and others can learn from the movie Soul. So the first one is that living your life can be an inspiration to others. So within the movie, we have Joe Gardner's character and the soul 22. And so when they're put on Earth, 22 is in Joe Gardner's body. So as they're going on their journey, 22 gets to experience Joe Gardner's life. So she gets to enjoy really mundane experiences like eating pizza, listening to somebody on the subway. It's really beautiful because it helps us remember that all those little details that we take for granted, someone who can't do those or experience those looks to us and says, wow, that's amazing that you get to do that. So I think there was a sense of like, be grateful for being able to live those small aspects of your life and take joy in those small aspects. And then also with that people look at you as an inspiration and how you live your life. I think especially as Christians, we're taught that all the time. Your life might be the only Bible people read. I remember hearing that all the time growing up. And I think now when I look at others within the Christian community, I look at them and I'm like, how are you a Christian? How do you believe these things? How do you support these things? And I think that has to do a lot with how people view Christianity now, because we see Christianity align with things. You're like, would Jesus have done that? I'd say right now there are especially Christians speaking in really loud and dangerous ways, and that's not the faith that I associate with. Is that how you love your neighbor well? Probably not. And so I think that's an important reminder that when we do things, people are looking at us, people are seeing how we live our life. How are we taking care of others around us? What are we doing to bring light into the world? Treat others in the best way that you know how to treat people, and the best examples of how to treat people well, because other people are watching. And I do want to speak a lot on this channel, like I said, about church trauma, and I do think a lot of that has to do with how the church has said they want to treat people and how they actually do treat people. And so we definitely will go a lot into that. And so I just wanted to mention, as I was watching the movie, I'm like thinking about how this soul is walking in the life of Joe Gardner, and she's like, oh my goodness, like look at all these beautiful things, and these are things that we don't even notice, like the breeze. And so it just reminded me to also just take moments of reflection and pause and think of all the beautiful things around us. Another great thing I think we can get from this film is the big fish, little fish analogy. This is actually the first time I'd ever heard the analogy, and I thought it was a really great moment in the movie. So in the movie, Joe Gardner had just finished his big gig, and he's speaking to the lead of the band, and he says to her, like, I thought that was gonna feel different. Like, this is my first big gig. I thought that was gonna feel much different than it feels. And she gives this big fish, little fish analogy. And so in the analogy, it goes that there's big fish and a little fish, and they're swimming. And the little fish says, I want to get to the ocean. And the big fish is like, this is the ocean. And the little fish is like, no, this is water. And I love that because it was just so simple. But I think it's a reminder to us that we think, oh, I have to experience this really big thing. And I think especially in Christian circles, I remember growing up in youth group and like mission trips were really big. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to be able to go to a developing country. I need to go out of the United States. I have to serve people. I have to do these really big things because that's what God is calling me to do. And if I don't do these things, then I'm not living faithfully into what Christians are supposed to do. It's a whole other thing about mission trips and colonialism, but we won't go there. But I really do think that sometimes Christians have this anxiety of like, you have to do big things. You have to become the next person that pours out all of themselves for others. So I think that's also one element of it. I think youth groups are really good about putting this idea in our heads that you're the chosen generation. You have to save the world. You have to get this together. You have to figure it out. And not even just that, but also with even like worship times. I think sometimes in worship settings, we're like, oh my gosh, if you don't feel God's presence right now, if you don't feel, and it's like all this feeling and emotions, like if you're not extremely passionate about this worship experience, does that mean, you have some sin that you can't figure out, or like you're not connected to God for some reason? And so I think sometimes we create anxiety in people where they're like, oh my God, am I doing something wrong? So I'm not feeling this overwhelming emotion. And I love that in that scene, we have this example of like, you're in the water and you're okay. Like, it's okay. God is with you. God's presence is with you. And just because you don't get that intense feeling, that you think you're supposed to get from worship, or an intense feeling you think you're supposed to get when you read the Bible. Like you're supposed to read it and it's gonna be like, oh, this is amazing. Like you don't get that feeling that there's something wrong with you. And I do think that's really helpful, like this idea that you're chasing something that you're already a part of. Like God welcomes you and invites you into this, and you're chasing this thing that you're already a part of. And I just love that image, and it's something that I've been coming back to over and over again, especially now in my faith journey, because I think growing up a lot of things were more dramatic in my faith journey, and now it's kind of like I do definitely have very intense moments with God, but for the majority of the time it's not that intensity. And I don't even like describing it that way, because it's intensity in a very subtle way, I guess, because I feel very connected to God in this part of my life and confident in my relationship with God. But it's not that dramatic, like go to the altar, pouring out. Basically what I'm saying is that we really stress ourselves with, I'm trying to get to the ocean, I'm trying to do everything that I need to do for God and be the best super Christian. And God is calling you to be faithful with what is in front of you. How are you serving the people next to you? How are you loving God and loving others in your community? How are you loving others near you? So number 3 that I thought was a really cool point in this movie is when the count guy, I forgot what his name is, gets Joe Garner and 22, and he he gets them and sends them back to the great before. And so while they're in the great before, they notice that 22 now has her Earth pass. And so she gets her pass, and then Joe Garner's like, we came up with a plan, and now I have to go to the great beyond, and you get to go to Earth. This is not fair. Like, you only liked Earth because you were in my body. And he starts really saying really negative things and making her feel like she didn't even try. And I thought this was like a really powerful scene about the power of our language and the power of our words, and how words can hurt people. And I think that's something we say a lot, but I don't think we always understand it as Christians, like what that means and what words and theologies we have that are harmful to people and how we keep perpetuating them. And I think sometimes we kind of have this idea, it's like, oh, I have to let them know. I have to let them know that their sin is bad. They have to know because that's my job. And then we don't show people the love of Christ. We don't show people that we actually care about them. It becomes, oh, we're here just to point out your flaws. And what I love in that scene is that there's a scene when 22 actually becomes a dark soul, because she's experiencing all these thoughts and she becomes a dark soul. And it's like really, I think, really beautifully animated. In this scene, we have 22 and she's surrounded by all the negative things her other mentors say. And she has Joe as one of those negative people. And I think in scripture, we have this idea that the power of our tongue is so important. What we say not only shows us who we are, but shows what we value. Scripture talks to us a lot about the power of the tongue, how we should use our words to build people up and edify them, and just really build people's spirits. Whenever I see someone post something and I look at the comments thread and I look at all these people saying their thoughts, and I'm like, it just truly shows you what is in some people's hearts. The first thing you see when you see someone's picture is you want to comment something nasty. The first thing when you see someone who disagrees with you, the first thing you're going to comment is something nasty. You don't want to have a conversation. You just want to comment something nasty. So what's in your heart? Or you want to comment a Bible verse to be like, oh, I got you. What's in your heart? Do you really want to show people God's love, or are you trying to prove them wrong? Do you really want to show people God's love, or have you become so focused on how you think of things and what you believe that you're unable to hear other people? I mean, that's what we need to reflect on. And I'm saying that for myself as well, because I think we all should reflect on how we speak to each other. And one point of scripture that I absolutely love is in Matthew 15:18, when Jesus is talking about how the religious leaders of that time were all like, oh, you and your disciples don't wash your hands. What's that about? And they were trying to catch him on doing something wrong against the law. And he pushes it back and he says, what's more important is what comes out of your mouth, because it shows who you are. And they also quotes Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, to say that basically that you guys don't actually care about the faith. What you guys care about is looking good. All you care about is showing that you're smart. All you care about is showing yourself as, this religious person, but you don't actually care about what God cares about. You don't actually treat God's creation as you should treat God's creation. So that's my paraphrase of the citation that Jesus gives of Isaiah. But what I love about that is that Jesus is saying, you want to call me out on these rules, but do you actually care about the people? Do you actually care about what God has called you to do and how God has called you to treat people? Do you actually care about that? I think that's a great lesson for all of us. Another thing I love about the movie Soul is that Soul tells us to breathe. And I think this is so important. And there's so many moments where I'm just like, breathe, breathe. That's what this movie is telling me to do. And I want to especially emphasize Christians need to breathe when it comes to vocation. I think there's so much anxiety around what is God calling me to do? What is God asking me to do? And there's so much pressure behind that. And it's like, just breathe. Live into where God has placed you right now. And that doesn't mean, you're just sitting around and not doing anything, not setting anything up for your life, but breathe. Look at the people around you. Love them. Treat them well to the best of your abilities. Pray if that's how you feel connected to God. Sing songs. Get that connection to God. Live each and every day not stressed out by the worries of tomorrow. Breathe and live faithfully into what God is putting in your life. And so if you get an opportunity to do something and you decide to take that opportunity, and people will say pray, and I think that all that is good. Consult your friends, ask for their opinions if that's, or family, whoever you go to for advice. I think that's wonderful to do that. I think God puts people in our lives for that reason. In our community, people are there for us to support us in that way. But I don't want you to feel anxious about decisions you're making. Because I think if you look at yourself and you say, in every decision that I'm going to make, I'm going to live in the love of God and sharing that love with others, then I think you're going to be okay. I think you're going to be okay. If you're worried about, am I going to do what I need to do? Am I going to live my life's purpose? And I think that's something that I love in the movie. Joe's character, he's speaking to his mom, and he felt like he was put on this earth to be a musician. And his mom is looking at him like, when are you going to get a real job? When are you going to stop doing this musician thing? When are you going to actually, plan for your future? And he tells her, I don't want to feel like my life didn't have any meaning. In the movie, there's a barber, and Joe had mentioned to 22, like, the barber was made to be barber. Like, that's his purpose on earth. And so the barber actually gets a chance to tell his story, and he said, I wanted to be a veterinarian, that's what I was passionate about, but what happened was my daughter got sick, and I had to actually go to barber school because it was like a cheaper option, so that's what I decided to do. And then he was like, so I think 22 says something like, oh, that's sad, like you didn't get to live out your purpose. And he's like, no, it's not sad, because I am living out my purpose still, because I found a way to love people. And so I do think sometimes our life isn't exactly what we expect it to be, but wherever we end up, we live faithfully into where we are. Also, another interesting aspect of the movie is a spark is not a soul's purpose. A spark is what just animates you to life. It can be anything. And that's why in the beginning of the movie, when 22 gets excited about eating pizza and hearing someone sing on the subway, it's because she's experiencing her spark, and it doesn't have to be something huge and big, and it's just asking you to live. And I love that, because I'm like, to find something that's not necessarily your purpose, but to say, like, I'm getting up. It can be even the simplest things. Like, I love waking up and seeing my plants have grown a little bit, and like, even if there's like a little leaf coming up, like, that is so exciting to me and beautiful and lovely, and that is a spark for me. You're here, you live, and that's wonderful, and you can celebrate life, and that celebration of life comes to us in so many different ways. And I think that's what the idea of spark means. I think is really helpful. And watching the movie Soul is that there's not a focus on timelines. They're looking at his life in the Hall of View, and he's seeing all these experiences he has, and he's just like, wow, like, this is okay. I was in this band when I was younger. I went here. Okay, that was kind of cool. And then he's thinking to himself, like, I didn't amount to much yet. When he does die, he's like, I was gonna have this gig, and that was gonna be life-changing. And I think that shows us that timelines are not helpful. Of course we want to set things up for our lives, but we can't control every aspect of what happens to us. And so I think it's a affirmation that sometimes you won't get that gig until you're older. And it's a beautiful reminder that even if things don't happen in the order and at the times you think they're going to happen, there are lots of other lovely things in your life that you can focus on and experience. Yeah, like you might not get married when you think you're going to get married. You might not have kids when you think you're going to have kids. It's talking about just not having those timelines and focusing on those timelines, but focus on just living in the now. So overall, I think Soul is a beautiful film, and I love that it came out at the end of 2020 as like a reminder that even when things don't go as we planned them to go, that things are still beautiful, life is still beautiful, and there are great things you can see and feel and experience from life. And so I think that's great. And I would also mention, so I did remember reading some people were saying that, oh, Soul is not really a good movie for kids. I disagree. I think kids have the capacity to learn and think about things that we don't even realize, and I think they have really interesting perspectives. And so 2 points that I think I would focus on with kids is I would talk a lot about how our words can hurt others, because I think that scene with 22 is really a powerful visual of how strong words can be and how detrimental they can be to someone's self-esteem. And I think that's a really good point to talk to kids about. And then also I would talk about the spark and like the idea that they can find joy and happiness in the smallest things on earth. Because I think that's what kids do a great job of that. You know, you have a little kid, they'll bring something up to you, like a little toy, and they'll just be so excited to show you. And I think they can understand that spark even better than older people can. And that idea of the spark being what animates the soul. And so I think that's really, really beautiful. If you've had an opportunity to watch Soul on Disney Plus, feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments. And if any of these points stuck out to you, I would love to start a conversation there. As always, you are loved and affirmed. Stay unencumbered.